September 8, 1950 became a special day in the history of Greenwood Village and the lives of its people. That late summer day was the beginning of Greenwood Village, the beginning of a legacy of challenge, leadership, and achievement, the beginning of a collective community commitment to quality of life, a legacy that endures today. Half a century ago, Greenwood Village was a land strewn with farms, dairies, gravel roads, and a population of 500 residents. Today, that rural heritage has been preserved with the addition of a developed, dynamic blend of urban and residential areas, and nationally recognized business parks. Our population has grown to 15,000 residents, with a daytime population topping 75,000 people. This is a story of how citizens, community leaders, and elected officials built a strong foundation on which our village stands today. This is a story of the joys and struggles of the birth and growth of our village. This is a story of our quality of life in Greenwood Village. Our heritage began in the early 1850s when many Native Americans passed through the area that became Arapahoe County. By 1850, the Arapahoe and Cheyenne Indians signed a treaty giving them the eastern plains between the South Platte River, near Fort Lupton, and the Arkansas River in southeastern Colorado. The Ute Indians lived in central and western Colorado and would come to Arapahoe County to trade and hunt. Greenwood Village resident Tom Linzy, who grew up in the 1920s and 30s, remembers picking up arrowheads on his land on Long Road.
How we come to find them, we were just playing around in the creek one day. And one of the girls said, "Tom, do you think that's an Indian hair?" So we took it to school, and they said, "Yeah." So we didn't tell nobody where we got it. And we got, I guess, about 6 or 7 more different sizes. One still had a stick on it, what the rope tied part was. And I don't know what happened to them.
Gold shaped the West, and the precious metal shaped our heritage. Prospectors first discovered gold near present-day Inglewood in 1858. Gold brought early settlers like John Melvin, who came to Colorado from Connecticut in 1859 and purchased 320 acres along Cherry Creek. John and Jane Melvin lived in a 3-room log cabin, which was later expanded to a hotel and restaurant known as the 12-Mile House because it was 12 miles from Denver. The community of Melvin grew. Melvin School was located just east of Jordan Road and Bellevue Avenue. Pioneer Rufus Clark came to Colorado in 1859 and bought 160 acres along the Platte River. Clark raised potatoes and was so successful, his farm soon grew to 20,000 acres, which he called the Clark Colony. His neighbors nicknamed him Potato Clark. Rufus Clark's farm included much of what is now Greenwood Village east of Holly Street. By the early 1900s, the area was largely agricultural. Orchards of cherry, apple, apricot, plum, and pear trees thrived. But in 1933, disaster struck. The Castlewood Dam burst. The floodwaters washed out 3 bridges. Since it was in the height of the Depression, the dam was not rebuilt, drying up the source of irrigation. Some residents turned to dryland farming, but after the orchards died, many took jobs in Denver. Only the dairy farmers were still able to make a living.
Well, the dairy farmers, it was easy because you could still do the dry farming. We had enough rain during the summer. Of course, it was always scary if you were going to get enough rain or too much hail, but it did work. And so a lot of them did go into dairy farming, but not to the extent that they had when they had water, enough to feed the animals, because now they had to go into Littleton and beyond to get the hay and alfalfa to feed them. And where we're standing used to be an enormous alfalfa field that my grandfather had.
At the same time, pioneer Cyrus G. Richardson built the Greenwood Ranch. Richardson's influence and Greenwood Ranch was the inspiration for the name of our city, Greenwood Village. Several African American families became prominent farmers and ranchers in the Greenwood Village area. William Linzy was a porter on the Union Pacific Railroad when he purchased 30 acres of land west of Colorado Boulevard and north of Orchard Road.
You had a dirt road, and the county would grade it about once a month, and then it would get bumpy again. And as far as anything else was working, you know, we had, like I say, I had the barn. We had 7, 8 cows at the time to milk. Dad loved to go to the mountains, and we'd try to go to the mountains at least 3 to 4 times a year. He really just go up and ride around and have a picnic and come on down. And one of us would have to stay here and start the evening milk if we got, you know, come back late.
Other newcomers to the area were Gladys and William Carson. The Carsons bought 20 acres of dry farmland near Orchard Road and Quebec Street to raise cattle. The early years were a struggle for the Carson family. The Carsons hauled water from a neighbor's place and lived without telephone or electricity. But hard work paid off, and they purchased additional land until they had 130 acres. Today, the Carson farm includes Greenwood Plaza, William McKinley Carson Park, and Greenwood Village City Hall. While the Carsons and the Linzys were farming the west side of the area, Francis Williams was farming the east side of the area.
It was just dry land, but it was a whole black farming community. Almost everybody was on a 10-acre minimum, and the whole 2 square mile was black families trying to scratch a living off of here. I don't know if it was the good life or not. I don't know if this is the good life or that is good life. You know, sometimes they, like they say in the song, they'll pave over heaven and put in a parking lot. But, yeah, well, Sarah can tell you, because when the road came through there, she always wanted them to pave the road, that dust and stuff. Now they pave the road, and you can't get out on it. So, I don't know, good or bad, but nevertheless, it was a high, windy area. She wanted me to name the place Windy Acres.
During the 1930s and 40s, the area became a mixture of farmers, suburbanites, and Denver residents who would come south to country homes for the summer. Farmers began to subdivide their land for homes and businesses. By 1950, residents began to worry that the development creeping south would threaten their pastoral lifestyles. That threat became reality when Englewood proposed a plan to condemn land owned by Mrs. Thomas Savage on Bellevue Avenue to construct a reservoir. Mrs. Savage and her neighbors were worried about the trend of development. They enlisted their neighbor, Charles Raleigh Enos, a lawyer, to protect their rural lifestyle by forming their own city.
I was fortunate in knowing Charles Enos, who was the founding father of the city. He and I did business together back in the 40s, and he was a wonderful man, and I knew about his dreams for this city. We talked about it frequently, and he had the idea that this community should be a very open and relaxed kind of a community, just to let people do what they wanted to do.
Petitions with 80 signatures favoring incorporation were submitted to Arapahoe County Judge Henry Teller, who ordered the incorporation election of Greenwood Village on September 8, 1950 at Curtis School.
Charles Enos was the instigator, and Charles Enos, he was the one that did all the work, all the law work and everything. He and Charles Beekler.
Voters felt strongly on both sides. Those in favor of incorporation wanted to control zoning, while farmers opposed incorporation for several reasons.
We fought it 2 or 3 times, tried to keep it out, because the farmers know what was going to happen. They said, you want to start, and a lot of the farmers was right, because they didn't have, enough money to keep going on the farm, and they would sell out real cheap pretty soon. There was not too many here, and then Greenwood Village started.
All of 138 qualified voters turned out to vote. The election was close, 74 to 64, but the town of Greenwood Village became a reality. The new town was 3 miles long, bounded by Bellevue Avenue, Holly Street, Orchard Road, and South Clarkson Street. Founding father Charles Enos became the first mayor. Enos presided over the first meeting of the Town Board of Trustees on October 6, 1950, at Curtis School. In the 1950s and 60s, money was an immediate concern and continued to be a concern for this newly formed town with a strong vision for a community.
Lack of
And
entire lack of money, no collection system, and no money was forthcoming to the mayor and the council.
There was not a city hall in those days, so the informal base of operations for the town was at the home of the town's second mayor, John Calkins. In fact, the Calkins 60-year-old barn was used as the town's maintenance department.
you always knew what the weather was by watching whether the lights were on at the barn, because guys were going out in the middle of the night.
While Greenwood Village was forming, Lindy and Margaret Ciala were moving their family to Ulster Street, where the Denver Technological Center stands today.
What the area looked like when we first moved out here looked like maybe a picture from Grapes of Wrath, I'd say. And a lot of tumbleweed, and when the wind blew, tumbleweed looks almost like buffalo moving through the area. These farmers had had many, many years of drought, and this is why we were able to buy as cheaply as we bought back in the 50s, and the ground was going for like $500 an acre at that time. But
While town government was getting its start, families were continuing to move south from Denver for the rural lifestyle. Bob and Ming Plunkett farmed the area bounded by Colorado Boulevard and Long Road.
Well, when we moved out here in 1956, it was pretty much a rural area, and Colorado Boulevard was just a cow path up there. Then the next thing we did was build the Quonset hut barn, and we had 3 stalls in the barn that we wanted to have dirt floors, so it'd be the barn later, but we wanted to live in it, so we put down plywood and made floors in the stalls. So the first stall was for 2 girls, second stall 2 boys, and us in the third. And we had everything from electricity, all the modern conveniences in there.
Greenwood Village still kept its agricultural and rural character. In the 1950s, the village had the largest 4-H group in Colorado. The club had 52 members who raised animals, studied birds, and planted trees.
We were able to be in 4-H in Little Britches, which is not the opportunity anymore for kids to do. In 4-H, they learned so many different things. We broke the club up into different groups. We had a bird group that was run by Mr. Frechner, who studied under Mr. Needrock from the Colorado State Museum there, and he knew all about birds. And then we had another group that was a forestry group, and those kids learned to do all kinds of gardening and planting trees and have a little nursery full of trees and had a...
As farming and ranching characterized the area in the early part of the century, annexations defined Greenwood Village from the mid-1960s through the present. Greenwood Village faced financial challenges throughout its first 2 decades, until commercial development came along to help pay the bills. Dr. John Wood, a local pathologist, served as mayor from 1965 through 1967. During his administration, the 3-square-mile town took its first growth spurt, annexing land east of Holly Street to Dayton Street and north to Union Avenue.
Well, John Wood was the mayor before I was the mayor, and it was during his administration that the city annexed the biggest
section of their commercial property, which of course is now the Denver Tech Center. So all subsequent annexations really began with his administration.
In the early 1960s, while young families were raising children, George Wallace would soon be inspired to begin development of the nationally recognized business park, the Denver Technological Center.
He had a successful consulting firm and officed in downtown Denver, but he was not comfortable with that environment and wanted to move his company and his employees out to a more suburban setting, place them in an environment where they not only could have plenty of open space, but hopefully live in the immediate proximity. So out of that arose George's vision of the Denver Tech Center.
Some of the land George Wallace wanted to buy was occupied by longtime residents.
When George Wallace first bought this property out here, or in this area, there had been a lot of other developers, or so-called developers, that came here before that, and everyone had grandiose ideas, but none of them had really backing to really carry it out. And when George Wallace came out, my wife said, "No, this guy sounds pretty legitimate. You ought to maybe talk to him." And that's when George came out, and our house set right back here, and he explained what he was going to do and his idea of the tech center. It really made this area. I mean, there's no fooling anybody. We have a good planned area. We have a lot of open space as compared to, say, having, if you work downtown. No, I think his ideas were great.
Due to annexations, the town of Greenwood Village had changed in character and geography. Several changes were needed for the village government and its people.
The city council that was elected at the same time I did really had two major objectives. One was to become a home rule city, and the other was to adopt a master plan for the city. I think we recognized the fact that the city was going to change in character by the addition of the commercial property, and it was very important to preserve the rural nature of the city so that it didn't lose all of the essential value that it had. So I asked one of the councilmen, whose name was Val Dean, if he would head up the project, and he and Harold Patton was very helpful, interviewed and hired a city planner by the name of Joe Marlowe. And Joe wrote our first master plan.
A home rule charter is necessary for a municipality, no matter how big the municipality is, because it allows that city to govern themselves as opposed to being under the rules and laws of the state. So, for instance, we had the right to levy taxes under a home rule charter, and we would have the right, and probably, maybe even more importantly, we had the right to control our zoning.
From 1969 to 1977 was a time of great growth and challenges for the city of Greenwood Village. Additional land in the Denver Technological Center and Greenwood Plaza were targets for annexation. Even more compelling, Denver was annexing to the south and east.
We were exceedingly concerned with Denver's annexations at that time. In fact, some irreverent observer thought Denver might annex clear to Pueblo. The unfortunate aspects of the Denver annexations were that Denver Public School District number 1 moved coincident with the city and county of Denver annexations. So at that time, school districts that had not been part of the Denver system were being annexed, gobbled up, if you will, by Denver School District number 1.
Denver's efforts on annexation prompted Freda Poundstone to draft an amendment to the Colorado Constitution that bears her name.
Denver was annexing, and was annexing very dramatically. Matter of fact, it even took the area that was Yosemite and Bellevue on the, would that be the west side, that went into Denver while we were doing the Poundstone Amendment. And so we would have been in a posture of having a handful of residents and a school district and absolutely no tax dollars. So Denver Tech Center and working with us was extremely important for us to make sure that we were able to keep that in Greenwood and protect the tax base, because the Cherry Creek School District, Greenwood, was the only protection it had.
The 1970 annexation brought additional commercial sites into Greenwood Village, making development subject to Greenwood's master plan and stricter zoning. John Madden developed much of the commercial area west of Interstate 25, known today as Greenwood Plaza.
Well, we and the city together wrote the zoning restrictions, so what you see, if you like, probably the credit should be shared mutually. It was between the various governments of Greenwood and ourselves.
The early 70s were good years for Greenwood Village. The city acquired undeveloped land at Holly Street and Orchard Road for its first pocket park. It wasn't until September 22, 1975, that residents would endure conflict and tough times that would put the city and its quality of life in peril.
There had been some contests mounted by people who were a portion of the annexation and did not choose to be in Greenwood. Those ultimately were heard by the courts and in fact by the Supreme Court of Colorado. And the outcome was that the city was bisected. It was torn asunder. The annexations were ruled invalid, and we had to begin anew.
The timing couldn't have been worse. In order to get the whole city together and be able to have the revenues that we would need to have to run the city for the ensuing year, we had to have a mill levy assessed and certified to the county by a certain date. We were about 8 weeks away from that date when the ruling came down.
With a large area back in Arapahoe County, villagers worked day and night scrambling for signatures to re-annex all the commercial and residential property that had been lost overnight.
Everything west of Holly Street had to be petitioned back into the city. We did that over 2 weekends, perhaps. We covered the entire area west of Holly.
On December 25, 1975, Greenwood Village officially re-annexed approximately 1,580 acres. In the late 1970s, parks and open space became a priority for the village. Mayor Sam Jenkins was elected mayor in 1977 and instituted a foundation for green belts, parks, and open space.
Mayor Jenkins had the time and inclination to manage the city on a day-to-day basis, although he did have a full-time job at the same time.
By 1978, Greenwood Village had 35 employees and their first city hall, a 2-story structure complex at South Quebec Street. By the early 1980s, the village had acquired its first large park, Village Greens. Beginning in 1981, due to the development of the Denver Technological Center and Greenwood Plaza, Mayor Fred Phifer began to lead the village in addressing transportation issues.
The arterials and even the interstate highway had not been designed to carry the traffic that was becoming necessary. I think rather though than focus on fixing the traffic problems, which were manageable in the short term, we really spent more of a time looking at the growth issue and trying to set up some longer range growth restrictions so that we wouldn't run into gridlock down the road.
In the late 1980s, the village continued its annexation efforts with the annexation of businesses along Arapahoe Road. Mayor Freda Poundstone, who served from 1985 to 1989, recalls a special memory during her tenure.
This park was special to me, and I think the reason it was special to me is Tommy Davis Jr., who lived in Green Oaks at that particular time, was on the Parks and Trails Board. And when we were doing the annexation, he worked very hard with me, and then he became very ill. And when this park was built, there was a general consensus among the council and myself that this should be named the Tommy Davis Park after one of our residents. Most cities don't do that, but we're so close to our people that we do. And I think it was just, this was just a wonderful memory. When I see this park and I see the trees that have been planted, and some were planted especially for Tommy Davis, that I think that means something, at least a memory for his children and a memory of goodness for this city.
During his term as mayor, Rollin Barnard's quest was to bring calmness and civility to Greenwood Village. It became a time of healing for the city of Greenwood Village.
I felt that the city needed to be directed in the area of quiet and agreement. And therefore, when the opportunity came to adopt some kind of a slogan as to what we were going to try to do, I expressed my desire to try to be a leader in the effort to get things quieted down, stop the arguments, work together, and get some things accomplished quietly, because really Greenwood Village is a wonderful city, and it's larger now than it was when I was mayor, but it's still a small city.
The commitment to quality of life continued in 1993 with Mayor David Hull. New accomplishments and threats came to the village community.
The authorities wanted to expand the airport, make it a commercial airport with scheduled aviation flights. We did not like that for a number of reasons. One was the flight patterns are over the city of Greenwood Village, which would meant more air traffic over our city. And the other is the infrastructure of the area just won't handle the extra traffic loads that the airport would generate. During my term as mayor, we enhanced the quality of life of Greenwood Village in several ways. One was we established a street program to repave all the streets and keep them clean on a weekly basis. We also purchased parkland. We purchased the Westlands Park, which is presently under development. We purchased Silo Park and completed that park as a park. The park that we're in right now is a park that was completed during the administration. We also established a flower program to get some color in the city. Everything was green for Greenwood Village, and we decided to establish more color. So the flower program started, and I think has been very successful.
Throughout the history of the village, everything said or done has been manifested around quality of life. Since 1997, Mayor David Phifer has continued the quality of life tradition, leading the village into the new millennium.
Focus on youth in the city of Greenwood Village is very important to me. I've raised my family here. I have 4 children that are still in school, either college or in high school in Greenwood Village. I think that as a city, we have an obligation to the young people to provide for them places to go, things to do, opportunities. We build a lot of roads, we build a lot of things, we spend a lot of money on infrastructure, but I feel that we need to build relationships with our youth. And I think we have done a lot of that. One of my personal goals in this term is to see to it that we leave, this council leaves to this city, some kind of a community center where not only our youth and our youth commission can meet and have functions, but the seniors in our city and everyone else in our city has a place to meet as a central part of our city.
For the past 50 years, residents, community leaders, and elected officials have worked diligently to enhance and protect the quality of life in Greenwood Village. The joys, struggles, people, spirit of community, and legacy of leadership over the last 50 years will remain a part of our lives and lives of future generations. Quality of life in Greenwood Village will always be as important as it was for our founding fathers and first-time residents. We are pleased to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Greenwood Village.